Hey, Rent Retires, it's Adam Schroeder here with Zach Lemaster for another episode. And today we are joined by Malaki Sims. He is a real estate investor, developer, and CPA who builds and rents in the inner city. And we're going to touch on a subject that we haven't really touched on before and take a deep dive in. So, Malaki, welcome to the show.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thank y'all for having me on and giving me a chance to, talk about something that a lot of people can benefit from. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's first start off. These things that I mentioned we're going to talk about are opportunity zones, which are a fairly new thing to most investors hearing about. So can you give us a brief overview of what an opportunity zone actually is and how they were designated?
Sure. So the opportunity zone law is essentially the government has decided certain areas, certain parts of the country, we're going to give you a tax break for if you come in and put your private dollars in this area to substantially improve the area. So you can do that by, doing significant rehab to something or building something from ground up to do new construction. And essentially we have all this money in untapped capital gains, trillions of dollars. And the government figures, okay, we can tap some of these capital gains, get private investors to allow us to tax a portion of it to come in and improve these areas. And in exchange for that, we'll give them this very huge tax break at the end, as long as they stay in this area and hold this property for at least a decade.
Now, you mentioned significant improvements. Is this something that you have to submit an application for and then say, I'm going to rehab, 123 Main and 125 Main, and this is what, do I qualify, or how do you make sure that you're going to be following the rules as you're getting into it?
No, so it's pretty self-regulated, actually, which is kind of the beauty of the program. Stuff like a 1031 exchange and different avenues like that, you have to go through some type of intermediary that kind of has to do everything for you. But with this program, you essentially just tell the IRS, there's a fund that you have to manage everything. It's called a qualified opportunity fund, which is basically an entity that you set up to own your property, which most real estate investors have anyway. A partnership, LLC, C Corp, something that holds their actual assets. So you're just telling the government, this company that's holding my assets is a qualified opportunity fund, which qualifies for this program. And there's some paperwork that you fill out to designate that fund as that type.
So let's break this down, Malachi, a little bit for anyone that has heard of opportunity zones, or if they haven't at all. What does this mean, big picture? If we could just kind of simplify the process. Basically, what this means is the government has identified certain areas throughout the country, and there's opportunity zones everywhere. Often some people associate opportunity zones as being low income areas, but that's not necessarily true. There's just general. I mean, you can pull up a map and look at opportunity zones. We've actually found investors that have invested in opportunity zones and not even known that they were in opportunity zones or built properties in them.
Right.
So this is a strategy that you can look at, and the first thing to do is identify where the opportunity zones are and if those are areas that you want to invest in. But basically what this means is by either doing large improvement, and we'll talk about how to quantify that, or building a property, doing an improvement in that area, which is what the government, that's why they did this, is to incentivize, more progression and economic development in an area. You will basically, if you hold it for 10 years, be able to sell that property and completely eliminate your capital gains. Is that the gist of it?
Pretty much. So I walk you through it like this, essentially. You say, the government says, hey, XYZ neighborhood, we want to see improvement in this area. So we designate that as a opportunity zone. If you invest in this area with certain stipulations, we'll give you this huge tax break. The first tax break is first of all, you have to invest with capital gains. It can't be ordinary income. It has to be capital gain income. If you take some of your capital gains out now, the government says you can take that out now and not pay tax on this capital gain until 2026. 2026, you have to pay, the pipers due, you have to pay tax on the gain that you just took out, okay? You put that gain in what they call a qualified opportunity fund, which is just basically an entity that you purchase your assets in. So now that your money's in that fund, you have a certain time frame to go out and purchase real estate or a business in that fund. And if you hold that business in that fund for at least 10 years, then the capital gains that you get from selling that entity, from selling that real estate, is tax free. You don't have to pay capital gains on that, but you have to pay gains on the original gain that you made the investment in initially.
Well,
And on
let's talk
top of that, you have to either do new construction, so you have to build something from ground up, because essentially the premise is the government saying we need you to make these areas better, right? So you either need to do new construction to make it better, or you have to do significant rehab. So significant rehab, just think of it this way: if I buy something for $100, I need to do $101 of rehab, and that counts.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because quite honestly, the only way I've looked at making opportunity zones work is doing new construction.
Right.
Because if you buy $100,000 property, it could be a rather big stretch to put $100,000 of renovation into it.
Well, it depends. So there's actually a small caveat. It might not come into play depending on the property, but if you buy vacant property and it's been vacant for at least 3 years, then you don't have to meet the substantial improvement requirement. Now, what are the odds that you're going to find something that's been vacant for 3 years that doesn't need a lot of work? But you never know. It's a possibility.
Okay.
And additionally, the other caveat is it really depends on your purchase price. So if I find a great deal on something and I can get a house for $20,000, then I only have to put $20,000 of improvements into it.
That makes sense. Yeah, and those are going to be areas that it really depends. I think for like the average person just looking at this, if you're not a rehabber,
right,
or if you don't have this established business to find off-market value properties and do this substantial rehab, probably what would make more sense is just to build in these areas.
Just to build new construction, which is kind of the best way to get it anyway. I'm saying as far as bang for your buck, because essentially if you're building from ground up, A, everything is new, but B, you can, cash out refi at the end on the new value and get all your money back. Because if you're building and you're doing it the right way, you should be under cost. It should cost less to build than to buy something brand new.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on, let's just clarify investing with capital gains a little bit. That's a little unclear to me as far as the money going into. So I can't just make $100K from my job and then put it into this fund, this qualified fund, which you need to set up to invest in opportunity zones. So can you break that down just for like the average or layman person?
Right.
What does that mean, investing with capital gains?
So capital gain income is a different, it's not active income, not from your job. It's a different income category. So essentially, I buy a house, I buy an asset, I sell that asset later. That income, I hold it for a year. So that's capital gain income. So I'm making income from the asset increasing in value from when I bought it compared to when I sell it. And that's typically taxed at a lower rate than active income or my W-2 income would be, depending on how much money you're making. Yeah. But you have to invest in the program with that type of income, because the government's essentially saying this $6 trillion in capital gains that's untapped, that investors keep rolling over from deal to deal, project to project, and they never pay tax on. You have to pull a portion of that out to invest now. So they're giving you a huge tax break at the end, but in exchange, they're potentially getting to tax some money now that they wouldn't have gotten if you didn't decide to put it out into this program.
So you sell a property.
Yes.
In let's say, okay, just to go through a scenario so everyone kind of understands this. Let's say you bought a property for $100,000.
Right.
You held it 5 years, whatever. It's worth $200,000 now. So you pass that year threshold. So it's no longer is it active income. It's the capital gains category. So bought it for 100, sold it for 200. You have $100,000 of capital gains. Just for even numbers. So you have to pay the capital gains tax on that, which 22%, depending on your location, probably. But then you can take that money and put it into this qualified opportunity fund, which you establish to be able to put into something else to then hold it for 10 years and not pay capital gains when you sell that.
So that 100,000, you have 180 days to put that 100,000 in your qualified opportunity fund. So if we're doing it today, today's what March? I mean June the 10th, I think 11th, 12th, something like that. Whatever it is.
13th, but yeah.
Today's the 13th. I take
Days
my
mean nothing.
I take my 100,000 gain right now. I have basically 6 months from today to move that into my fund. Okay, it has to be in the fund, and then I have another time period. It changes depending on when you put it in, but essentially, then I have to get that $100,000 of gain. I have to get 90% of it into some type of property, a property or a business. I focus more on the property side, but let's just keep it simple and say property. I have 90 days. I have to get 90% of that 100,000, 90,000 of it into an investment of some type. So you can't just cash out and park the money in the fund and not invest it, because that.
How long was that? You have
I have 180 days to get the money into the fund.
And then how long to invest it into a project?
Typically, it's just say another 180 days, but it's really based on like they have two criteria each year. So the end of June, the end of December, they basically have a test where you have to have 90% of your funds into some type of investment. So depending on when you make your initial transfer in, that's going to be your cutoff. Those two cutoff points is kind of what determines if your fund is a legal fund or not, to make sure that you're hitting that 90% threshold. Now the tax on that $100,000 isn't due until 2026. Okay. You have to pay it in 2026. And then if you hold that investment for 10 years and sell that investment, then the capital gains from that, you don't have to pay tax.
Do these have to be capital gains from real estate, or can they be capital gains from
your
stock running up?
Anything.
Okay.
As long as it's a capital gain. It doesn't have to be from real estate. And you don't need to, so if the house costs, just like any other type of real estate, if your house costs $100,000, you don't need $100,000 of capital gains. You just need whatever you need to get the deal. You can still use financing for the program for the rest.
Yeah. Okay. And so when it comes to opportunity zones, like what's the best way to actually find out where the opportunity zones are? Is it is there a website for it specifically? Is it just like you look on IRS's website, or where do you find these things?
I would Google opportunity zone map and just look there. You can search by address, location, or you can Google, I live in Houston, Google opportunity zone map Houston, and Houston has a website that focuses on opportunity zones, and most cities have one as well.
Yeah, Adam, when you mentioned acquiring businesses, you can do real estate or businesses. With the businesses, are you just having to keep them afloat, or are you having to invest capital into them as well?
Well, you put capital into the businesses, but they have to have that. Those businesses have to have property and things like that in the opportunity zone, and a certain percentage of it has to be there. But I don't touch that side at all. Yeah. I focus strictly on the real estate.
Okay, I just didn't know if you knew, do you have to make that $100,000 business into a $200,000 business, or you just have to keep it open?
Yeah, that I'm not sure.
Okay.
Only because I've never done a business.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I could see a lot of people looking at this and they're intrigued by the idea. Obviously, taxes being a huge, when you make good money in real estate and do value add projects, or just let appreciation do what it does, like we've seen over the past few years, it's like, the tax day is coming. And so there's all sorts of different creative ways we try to expedite our investing success by limiting the amount of tax we have to pay today, down the road. We've talked about cost segregation studies in the past. That's a big thing that we do personally. But still, depreciation is recapturable. You can 1031 that. But with an opportunity zone, I could see someone looking at this and saying, I love the idea of it, but it seems like so complicated with how to set up the fund. Are there people out there that do this for people, or can you just research and educate yourself on how to do it?
So I would say that the caveat is whether or not you're raising money from other people. So if you're raising money from other people, whether that be via pure syndication or crowdfunding or something like that, if you're raising, then you have SEC type rules that you have to get involved with. Then it can get complex and you need to get some professional help. But if it's just you doing your own investing with your own money, then literally you only fill out 2 additional forms with the IRS. So I don't, in my opinion, I don't think you need anybody to do that, or anybody other than whatever CPA you're already using. They're going to fill out 1 extra sheet of paper with the entity, the opportunity fund that's holding your assets that you're purchasing your real estate through. And then with your 1040, 1 year, they're going to, or whatever year you do the initial investment, they're going to fill out 1 additional form to kind of let the IRS know, I sold something, I created a capital gain, but I'm not paying tax on it now because I put that money in an opportunity fund.
You have the CPA background, so it may seem rather easy, but definitely having a CPA that could that understands this stuff too could probably guide you. I would think, right? Someone that's
right. So that's why I say it's either you or it's 2 other forms for your CPA to fill out. 2 additional forms. One with the business return and 1 with the tax return. With the business return, you're essentially letting the government know this entity is a qualified opportunity fund. So we're putting this under the Opportunity Zone program. And then with your personal 1040, you're letting them know that I sold something, but I'm not paying tax on it now because I put the money in this fund.
Let me just review these steps, Malachi,
Okay.
and let me know if you missed anything, just to make sure that I fully comprehend this and everyone listening does as well. So if you're interested in investing in opportunity zones, this is a way to pay tax up front on a capital gains, but ultimately improve the value appreciation down the road, holding for 10 years and not pay any capital gains on that as long as you follow the rules. But essentially,
Right.
you identify an opportunity zone, you have a capital gain from a sale of real estate or from some other source that is a capital gain. You establish a qualified opportunity fund that you need to put the money into within 180 days, right? The money needs to go into that fund with 180 days from the point of receiving your capital gains.
Right.
So it can come to your bank account. It's not like a 1031 where it has to go to an intermediary.
Nope.
Establish that fund, put the money in there 180 days. From that 180 days, and by the way, the taxes on the capital gains that you have to pay on that technically isn't due until 2026.
Right.
And then from that point, you have roughly 180 days, I believe, to then put 90% of that money into a project. Does that project need to be completed? It doesn't.
No.
I mean, you can just
need to
start it. Okay.
Start it. And typically, especially for significant rehab, they typically give you about 30 months to get it done.
What about building?
At least on
Same
new
thing,
construction.
or?
Yeah,
Okay.
about 30 months. Yeah, to get it done.
So let's talk about your specific strategy, because I mean, you are someone that's investing, and it sounds like doing construction specifically in opportunity zones is kind of one of your main investing strategies. Can you talk a little bit about your story and like specifically what you're doing?
Sure. So I started doing real estate investing around 2011, and I'm in the Houston market. The Houston market used to be pretty cheap, but now it's getting kind of expensive because we have all these people coming from California and all types of other places, and they're driving the market up. So eventually, at some point, I realized it got cheaper to build stuff, especially if you want inner city property as opposed to things closer to the suburbs. Than it costs to buy stuff. So I changed our strategy once this law came out. Once I saw the law come in 2017, I changed our strategy to focus on building inside the city, inside the main city limits, because again, the real estate in opportunity zones is really great real estate in a lot of areas. So we do new construction. We just, we buy land. We use the capital gains to buy land, get into the deal, and then we build new housing on top of that, and then we hold it and rent it out. So we're going to hold it. We'll definitely make sure we hold it at least 10 years, but we don't necessarily plan on selling anything. So for us, the law is really just, when you're doing real estate, you want to provide as many exit avenues as possible. So it's a long-term exit avenue just in case something happens and we need to sell something. At least we know that we can sell it and not pay taxes on it. So
what happens if you do sell within that 10-year period? Isn't there something to do with like 5 years partial, or
you just pay the tax that you normally would have paid anyway? No penalty. But you even if you sell it, you've done what the program intends for you to do. You made improvement in the area. So now all you're going to do is sell it and pay us tax when we were going to give you a tax break. That's
Okay.
all. So
What
no
kind
problem.
of response have you seen? I mean, obviously you're doing it in Houston. Kind of is with what you're seeing across the country, has this been working well? Has there been a pretty substantial amount of money put into these areas?
Yes, for larger deals, larger syndication, larger projects. For individual investors like myself, uh, the lack of education on it is, we just don't really know about the program. I still see a lot of people, trying to do 1031 exchanges now instead of doing this, which is, more advantageous. But so, uh, yeah, most individual investors don't seem to just be educated on the program enough to do it. So most of the activity that you see revolves around large syndicators or people with large funds that are convincing others to, come invest in our fund, as a passive investor, and then we'll pass these tax breaks on to you, which is fine. That's great. But in people that do, regular normal investors that do significant rehab, which is a lot of them, or that are doing build to rent, which is quite popular now and getting more popular by the day. This program is tailor made for those investors. They don't have to do anything different than what they're doing now. They just have to do it in a certain area and make sure that it's structured properly.
Yeah, so it sounds like, I mean, if the big funds are doing it, I assume that means that there's a lot of work being done on like apartment buildings and those kind of things, but
Yeah.
the single family sector in these areas isn't really being served like it was hoped for.
Not a lot. I haven't seen it a lot. And actually, I've seen more, and just from my friend base, more individuals that are doing investment in an opportunity zone and didn't know that it was an opportunity zone. And by the time they figure it out, it's too late because you have to make the purchase with capital gains. You have to purchase it through that fund. So once you do it, you can't go back and set the clock back and do it again.
Yeah, Adam, if you look at Southwest Florida and some of the areas we're doing build to rent, there's a good chunk of that is opportunity zone. That is, very viable real estate. Actually,
Yep.
it's like right in smack dab, and the area that we like to focus on. And some of the personal builds that I have are in opportunity zones. We've elected not to go that route because our plan is to simply just liquidate them in less than
Makes
10
sense.
years. But we knew that going into it,
Right.
and that's that was our plan. But let's
And,
talk a
and,
little bit.
and that's the other great thing about build to rent is that with the OZ law, not only do you not have capital gains, but there's no depreciation recapture either.
Well, that's something we should probably talk about as well, because I wanted to hit on how you can combine some other tax strategies to really maximize this. So for someone everyone takes normal depreciation, right? I think you're required to take depreciation.
Right.
But if
You
someone's
should,
doing,
because you're gonna they're gonna make it
Yeah.
seem like
you
you
pay
took
The
for it either
IRS
way.
does it for you.
Yeah.
You might as well take it.
Yeah. So, and that's an important thing of why, you got to be tracking depreciation, making sure you're working with an accountant
Right.
that, is familiar with real estate. So many times we see just the mom and pop investors that just aren't calculating depreciation or doing it appropriately.
Correct.
But with, combining this with other tax benefits. So someone that wants to do like a cost segregation study, you can also do that. And are you saying if you follow all these rules, there's no depreciation recapture for that period?
Yes, when you sell, same thing, no depreciation recapture. So if you have some property and you want to take a cost seg now and get your 100% bonus depreciation, that fear of paying that tax back is eliminated.
Any 1031 rules around opportunity zones? You can, I guess it doesn't really apply, right? If you went into, there is no capital gains. But so for your instance, though, your capital gains coming, and not to get too personal, but are you selling real estate or,
No, I don't. I don't sell any real estate. So
hold it forever
I'll sell other things to create a capital gain.
and then put it into real
And
estate?
then
I love it.
And then put it into real estate. Yes, because again, the program still allow you to use leverage. So the real estate that you buy, you just need enough money to get the deal. You don't need enough money for everything else. You can finance everything, which is another thing that's great about build to rent, because at the end of the day, you have this new asset sitting there and building. If you're doing rehab, there are certain limitations as far as the loans that you can get to do your rehab work. But with build to rent, it's a lot easier to finance the process with a lot of debt from beginning to end.
So how you're making this work is you're taking your capital gains, you're using that to put in this fund, you're buying the land with the fund, you're
Mhm.
hiring a builder to build in these areas, and that's basically it, right?
Yeah, take capital gains, buy land, get enough capital gains to get the deal, which is via the land or the loan. Get enough capital gains to get into a loan, and then finance the rest, build the rest. I mean, finish the house, new house at the end of the day. Take a take a loan to finance it out. Keep your portion of capital gains in there because you can't. They don't want you making money, from disguised sales and things like that off of pulling your capital gains out too early that you originally invested. So keep that in the fund, finance the rest, and then, get a new product that hopefully if you build it the right way, you should have less repair cost, as the years go on. And then, you have a new house that's essentially free that you have the option to sell tax free in 10 years and
So
rent it out.
just to be clear, let's say going back to this example, you have $100,000 of capital gains from whatever, could be a real estate sale or
Right.
whatever source. You put that $100,000 into this qualified fund. You don't necessarily need to invest that $100,000, right? I mean, you could do, if the land is $20,000 and let's say a build is 200,000, can you carve out? I mean, can you just do that one build and keep the money in the fund?
No,
Or
so that's where again. So every halfway point of the year, the end of June, end of December, they have these trigger point tests to make sure that your fund is in compliance. And to be in compliance, 90% of the gains that you put into the fund have to be in some type of property. So you can't use the fund to just park your capital gains. You have to get it in some type of investment.
so you could take that $100,000, you could buy five $20,000
Yep.
lots, or I guess, well, you'd need five of them to be at 90%, and then, build 5 houses in that opportunity zone, run a cost segregation to take accelerated depreciation if you're a real estate professional.
Yes.
And bada boom, bada bing, no taxes paid when you sell it 10 years, and no depreciation recapture.
Well, so yes, correct. So you could take your cost segregation if you're a real estate professional, or if you're doing short-term rental. Because if you're doing short-term rental, that counts as active income. You don't have to be a real estate professional. So it kind of helps you if you're building to rent. Just don't.
We talked about that with our last CPA interview with, was it Brandon?
It was Brandon. Yes.
Brandon Hall, I think, was it?
Yep.
So talk about that a little bit, Malachi, if you don't mind, just the differentiating factor with doing short term versus, being a real estate professional and having to do cost seg.
Okay, so a real estate professional status is really hard to get if you have a regular job. Obviously, if you don't, or you or your spouse, if somebody doesn't, and your spouse is the one really doing all the work, then they can make it a little easier for them to qualify for that designation, because real estate is inherently considered to be passive. It's not active, so they don't want you counting that against your regular job, which is an active income bracket, active income bucket. But short-term rental, is considered, to be more like someone renting a hotel or something like that. The services you're doing things, on a daily basis. So it kind of can be considered active. So if you're doing short-term rental and you're the main one doing all the work, no one's doing more work than you, and they have certain hours, that you have to hit and things like that, then you can use all of those losses as and count it against active income without being a real estate professional.
Do you mean cost seg or doing accelerated depreciation for a short-term rental?
Yes.
Okay. So
it's actually better. So because with short-term, you always have the argument, should I arbitrage or should I own, right? The main advantage to owning versus arbitrage is that you do get the depreciation and the accelerated depreciation, plus your taxes, and interest and things like that, but mainly the depreciation, which if you have a normal job, it allows you to offset that against your W-2 income without being a real estate professional. So it's a nice little shortcut.
And you would do a cost seg study on that as well, though, right? To determine what accelerated depreciation you can take without being a real estate professional.
Correct. You still need a cost seg if you want the bonus. If not, then do it under the normal time frame.
Now, going back to the opportunity fund that you create for yourself, let's say I sold a property, had the $100,000 in gain, but I really needed 120,000 to do the project that I want. Can you add in your own capital, or are you just kind of out of luck and need to find another deal?
No, you can add in capital or financing, from others. That's no problem. It's again, so the main thing is the portion that you need to get the deal should be with your capital gains.
Oh, but if I only had 100,000 in capital gains, I needed 120. I couldn't just take
Oh,
20,000
take
from my bank account.
another income type. No, no. It all has any money that comes into it that's not financed. Sorry, I misunderstood the
Okay.
question. Any money that comes that's not financed needs to be capital gain. No ordinary income. So you can go get money from a partner or someone else and do the same thing, or just borrow more.
Okay. Now, what have you seen? We mentioned that a lot of funds that are out there that are being done are being kind of syndications. What are some of the things that you think people need to be looking for, both positive and negative, in these syndications to know that they're going to follow the rules or are likely to follow the rules? I guess you can't guarantee it, obviously,
Right.
and kind of how they can vet them if they need to.
I mean, the main thing, just like with any other type of deal, see their track record. So see the type of deals that they put their money in, and the return that those deals have made, and make sure they're legitimate. Because you don't want to invest just for the tax benefit. You still want the deal, to make money. So I wouldn't put my money in any syndication that doesn't hit my normal criteria for whatever I expect my return to be. So make sure that they're hitting those numbers and see what they're going to put the money in, whether it's, a project they've identified, or if it's, we're thinking about putting it in this, and then see what type of returns they've had in the past, whether that's from an opportunity zone investment or not. Because again, nothing should change. The only thing that's changing is the area where you're investing, but you should still have a track record to show that you've done successful deals.
In that scenario, they would have to hold the property for 10 years. So that, I mean, that's
Yes.
a little bit longer than we see a lot of typical funds. So I guess the investor would need to be prepared for that as well, to have their capital tied up for at least that long.
Yes. Correct.
But let's talk about the dates a little bit. We'll talk about the important dates of opportunity zones people need to be aware of, and also just real quick on the cost segregation stuff, though. 2022 is the last year someone could take 100% bonus depreciation. Next year, I think it steps down 20% per year. Is that right? At least
20% per year. Yes.
Okay. Unless that, I guess, something legislatively happens to reinstate that. We don't know.
Correct.
But as it stands right now, that's where it's at. So that also applies, though, to the short-term rentals as well, right? Being an active investor. If you're not a real estate professional, nothing changes with those.
That's just the law. That has nothing to do with the recent legislation. So
let me help me understand that a little bit, Malachi, because if you're a real estate professional, you do this cost segregation on whatever asset, you get this 100% bonus depreciation. Typically, I've seen mine being 25 to 40% of the actual improved value, removing land.
right.
But with a short-term rental as an active investor, I'm still trying to understand, how can someone that's not a real estate professional, how do we quantify the amount of depreciation that they can take that doesn't apply to the cost seg rules of this 100% bonus? Or
So it does. So I guess you're conflating the two. So think of it two ways. What's ending, or what's going down 20% each year, is the bonus aspect of doing a cost seg. Okay. Assume that bonus aspect weren't there, you can still do a cost seg, and you can still take normal depreciation. The other part is whether it's active or passive. So assume I don't have a cost seg, but I'm just taking my normal depreciation of my house. If I'm doing it via short-term rental, the only difference is I can now take what is typically considered passive. It now can't count as active if I'm the one doing most of the work. And now I can take that against my normal. I can combine those losses, potential losses, with normal active income.
do you normally not get depreciation on a short-term rental?
If you own it, you get depreciation 100%. If you arbitrage, you do not.
Okay. And explain for the audience arbitrage. What do you mean by that?
So there are two ways to really invest in short-term rental. The first way is if I own an actual property of my own and I short-term rental my own property, then I get all the benefits, all the tax benefits that you typically get from owning real estate. You get depreciation, you get to write off your property taxes, you get to write off your interest, not your principal, right? But arbitrage is I'm making money short-term renting your property. So I would come to you and say, hey, I can get you more money than I'm essentially being your tenant. And then I'm
Like a
going
master lease type
short-term
thing?
rental. I'm sorry?
Like a master lease type thing?
Kind of, you and I'm signing a normal lease with you. Just instead of you signing a lease with Malaki Sims, you sign a lease with Malaki Sims short-term rental company or whatever. And then I'm going to short-term rental your property, but I'm still paying you a normal monthly amount, just like a regular tenant would. So now I'm making money from doing short-term rental, but I don't own the house or I don't own the apartment that I'm doing it in. And that's what's called arbitrage.
Gotcha. So let's keep going with the timeline that Zach was saying. We have the step down in basis. We have your capital gains tax coming due in 2026 for the things you're selling today.
Correct.
What are some other key timelines people need to know?
And the main key timeline is you have to sell. If you're going to take advantage of the tax-free capital gain, you have to sell by December 2047.
Meaning you got to buy it before 2037 to be able to hold it for that
The
10
whole
years.
10
And this
years.
is, again, we're bouncing back and forth, but this is about the opportunity zone investing.
Yes.
So sell the tax, or you have your capital gains, which isn't due today, that you're putting into this fund due 2026.
Right.
You need to buy a property by 2037 to hold it 10 years. To then at 2047, that would give you the ability to hold it longer if you wanted to, right? Or sell it capital gains free.
Correct. And what I typically tell people to do, if you Google opportunity zone timeline, then there's a great website that typically comes up as one of the first links that goes over every single date, including the prior dates that we missed. Because previously, if you held it, if you made your initial investment of capital gains in there, if you had it in there for 5 years and then 2026 hit, you could have gotten a 10% reduction in the capital gains that you originally had to pay. But that time date is passed,
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, if you Google opportunity zone timelines, it's a pretty good document that'll come up in one of the first few links that goes over all the dates.
Yeah. Now, if somebody invests after 2026, are the capital gains taxes due that year?
Pay that tax.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. That's good to know. So what other things should people know about opportunity zone investing?
The main thing is it's something you can do yourself or, with your CPA. It's not complex. It's really simple. 2 extra forms with the IRS. And the second thing is it's really, really good real estate. Some of the areas, like I live in Houston again, and, like a third of all of the tracks, the inner city tracks inside of Houston's main city limit are opportunity zone property. Most of downtown Houston is opportunity zone property.
Yeah.
The land around every one of our sports stadiums, where Rockets, Astros, Texans, and Dynamo play, and all of these, we're not like some cities where our stadiums are in another city.
Yeah.
Our stadiums are in Houston, in the inner city, and all the areas surrounding that is opportunity zone property. It's some really, really great real estate. That's the main thing. If you just look at that map, a lot of people really think, oh, this is, downtrodden areas. You'll be surprised at some of the prime real estate that counts for this program.
Yeah, I was going to say, if people don't know Houston, the areas that he's talking about are places you would want to invest in, probably even if there weren't opportunity zones.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
Malachi, just kind of in closing, I mean, if someone that's hearing this is like, this sounds interesting, I want to learn more about this. I mean, what advice would you give to someone about how to go about starting to, build their plan to invest in opportunity zones? Obviously, identifying where those are at and choosing an area. What from there?
Identify the area, and then start sourcing where you can pull capital gains from without selling real estate.
So that's a good idea of actually having your plan. Find the area first, have your plan, and then reverse engineer it to plan
Right.
where you're going to use that from capital gains.
Right. Because and also get your which I think applies to anyone just doing real estate in general, but make sure you're fine. Make sure you look good on paper. Make sure your credit is good. Make sure your debt to income ratio is good, because you want to be able to leverage and not have to use your money. And in this instance, the more you can leverage, the less you'll need in your capital gains to use. So I would really try to focus on just looking good on paper to the banks, and being able to go out and obtain financing, especially if you're doing build to rent. Well, even if you're doing significant rehab, because you don't want to have to rely on hard money lenders and things like that. You should, want to get to a point where you can be your own bank and have lines of credit in different avenues like that with different lending institutions.
Now,
No,
does the lending change at all? Like, are lenders incentivized to lend to people doing opportunity zones, or it's just a regular loan?
Some of them are, because some of the areas qualify. I don't know the name of the program, but they have some areas that lenders get credit for doing business in those areas. So it might be a possibility.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, and rent to retirement on the build to rent stuff, we do have areas that are in opportunity zones. We don't set those up for people. That's something you have to decide if that's the route you want to go, and obviously follow all the parameters that Malachi has outlined. As far as pulling where those funds are going to be pulled, making sure those are capital gains, setting up the fund. But from there, there are areas that you can identify that are opportunity zones to do build to rent in and take advantage of this.
Yeah, identify the area. Identify the area, see where you're going to pull money from, and then make sure you can get financing on your own.
And set up the fund so you don't find out later after the fact.
Yes, set up the fund.
That you are in an opportunity zone and it's too late.
Yeah, the money has to flow through that fund to make the investment, and it has to be capital gains.
All right. Well, Malachi,
it's that simple, but if you mess up those simple things, you're screwed.
Yeah, that's when the federal government isn't very forgiving when it comes to taxes.
No, it's not that. They're like, sorry, we know you bought it, 3 days prior, but you can't go back and say, oh, now let's do it this way. No, it's too late.
All right. Well, Malachi,
I'm sorry. It has to. You can't buy from a related party. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Let's quantify that a little bit. Related being like business, partnership, family.
Yeah. Family, mainly family.
Yeah,
someone that's related to you. So, or yourself, right? You can't already have the house and then say, I'm selling it to this other entity I own in OZ. Like that doesn't count.
Be a lot cooler if it did sometimes.
Yeah, new purchase.
Got it.
Independent, third party.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Malachi. I really appreciate you taking the time to educate us and our listeners about this, relatively underutilized opportunity for investors. So for everybody else, check us out at renttoretirement.com. That's renttoretirement.com. You can see the properties we have. You can compare them to opportunity zone maps and see if that's something that fits your investment style. I appreciate any reviews you leave on the podcast platform of your choice. And as always, if you have any questions, email them to podcast@renttoretirement.com. That's podcast@renttoretirement.com. And we'll talk to you on the next episode.
Thanks for watching the Rent to Retirement YouTube channel. Check out some of our other videos, like this one, or this one here.